the presentation that I'll be presenting is a little bit different than some. And so what I'm presenting is an introduction in assessing return on investments in machine learning algorithms or projects. And so to kind of give you a background about myself, for everyone who's watching. So my name is Helmut Neher, and I have a master's degree in system design engineering from the University of Waterloo. And so most of my work has been in machine learning, AI, in a variety of different applications. One of them includes medical, sports analytics, retail, horticulture, agriculture, and manufacturing. So I've been all over the place. Some things I've worked on is AI diagnosing systems with skin cancer visualizations. I've also worked on hockey, broadcast video, so sports analytics essentially, both with hockey and with lacrosse. And then I've also worked on robotic systems. One most recent is working on a fastener placement in manufacturing. And then the next one also is developing camera systems for AI for detecting cavities. So those are the most notable works that I've worked on in the last while. And then I've since transitioned into being a consultant. And so I work at a company called H10, and I consult and contract essentially any work that needs to be done for different companies that need R&D, development, production, anything and everything really at this point. And so let me continue on to kind of give you a quick introduction of AI. And most people do obviously know AI, considering it's CAMDEA and data science as well. But I just wanted to kind of highlight the importance of AI that's happening. And you can see all these articles where AI is innovating. It's innovating many jobs. There's a lot of positive factors that are happening. It's essentially improving the quality of life. Now, what I've learned is that artificial intelligence and machine learning, they're not just buzzwords anymore. They used to be. Many people would say, oh, AI can't really think for itself. But, it's probably the most important technology to invest in the 21st century. And there's a lot of reasons to why. Now, in practice, though, the adoption of machine learning and artificial intelligence requires three things. It requires people, it requires time, and it requires budgets. And so with people, like every machine learning solution is designed, it's built, it's implemented, it's optimized by a team of highly trained developers, whether they're machine learning scientists who are working on the research side, or they're engineers who are working on the development side. And so these skills are very expensive to hire, and they're sometimes tough to find. It's really interesting to see, even though that there's a lot of people that are wanting to be part of machine learning, the demand for AI and machine learning is ever so increasing. And so the second part is time. There's a significant amount of time that's usually required to collect and clean data, to build, to test, to optimize, all those kinds of things. And then the third thing is budget, because people are generally highly skilled, that is a cost associated with that. And then plus the amount of time that it takes in order to develop really efficient and effective models. And so these three things are very core into artificial intelligence. Now, that is to say that machine learning can easily be either a dead-end option or a winning ticket for a business. And that's why it makes sense to look at the process to understand if machine learning is right for your business before jumping on board. So essentially, because you have those three factors, the goal is to, before you even think about incorporating artificial intelligence into a potential startup or a company or mature company or whatever it may be, to first assess if machine learning is something that's actually right for your business, both from the sense of if it fits the problem that you're solving, but then also if you'll get if it will actually increase your return on investment. And I know this is less of a research type of problem, but I come from a background of startups. And so that's how I typically think is, the initial stage. We all know we can learn how to make models. We can always learn to improve and make these models efficient. But I think what I hope to do today is to help people to understand, if they ever start a company or if they are in a position of doing research and potentially development, of how you can assess whether your models actually will return a big investment in your company that you're a part of. And so I want to suggest to you three ways in order to do that, or a three-step process, so to say, on how to assess if machine learning will increase your return on investment. So the first thing is to assess the current needs of your business by creating user stories. I'll go more into detail into all three of these with some examples. The second one is to rank the user stories by estimating the desired need and time to complete. The third one is to create a machine learning canvas for each user story with the greatest impact and least time to completion. So let's start with the first idea. The first task is to create user stories. I assume most people have some sort of tech background or might have heard of agile development. But just to kind of give you a quick update on this, and maybe for those who don't know, but essentially, in order to create user stories, you first need examples of feedback. You need people to say something to you. You need users to say something. So these could be examples such as, where's the invite button to invite my friends in a consumer application? Or, I would like to pick a movie based on a variety of videos tailored to my preferences. If it's, once again, was like a recommendation system that you're using. Third one is, my documents are not organized and this seems chaotic. If you're doing a B2B type situation like Intuit or QuickBooks or whatever it is. So all of these are valid examples of feedback that people have. Now, the first goal or the first step is to transform this feedback into something called user stories. And so this is a method to summarize what a product or feature of a product should do into one sentence. It's the smallest unit of work. It's one story that should only have one concept. And as a user story, it should describe three characteristics: the user, a goal, and a reason. And so that's why you see this format or this template that people provide. As a type of user, I want to provide, then you say some goal, and then the third thing is so that, and you provide a reason. So to give you an example, a customer need would be, where is the invite button to invite my friends? You would then convert that into, as the customer, I want to invite my friends so we can enjoy the service together. So once again, it's highlighting that a customer has some sort of goal and there's some sort of reason behind it. It's really to understand and to create a persona of someone so you can get to know them better, essentially. So you can have empathy and sympathy towards a customer in order for you to really understand and be in their shoes. Let's give another example. So my documents are not organized and this seems chaotic. Well, as a user story, you would say, as the customer, I want to organize my work so I can feel more in control. Because ultimately that's what they want, right? They don't want to feel flustered. They don't want to feel stressed. They want to eventually just have that control. They want their work organized. That's what they want. So why do we create these user stories? There's really three reasons. The first, the stories keep the focus on the user. The second, stories enable collaboration. So that means that because we're able to identify a persona, many people from different backgrounds are able to relate and to understand this. And then they're able to collaborate together in order to provide solutions. And that leads to the third one, which is stories drive creative solutions. If you can create a story of a person, then your mind becomes unlocked. You're able to really understand potentially what solutions you can do. And if you isolate on a problem, that is the pinpoint to developing many solutions. You don't need to be focused on one particular solution, but then you can then have that creative opportunity of thinking of many. And so in summary, user stories are the smallest unit of work. It's not an end goal. It's not a feature. It's expressed from a user's perspective. And it's within that format of, as a type of user, I want some goal so that some reason. And so the focus is on the customer. It's on the user. It's on the persona, not the solution or features in a product. And I think that's typically one of the biggest things to stress about, is that when you're trying to assess machine learning, especially if you come from a tech background, I'm definitely a victim of this, is that you shouldn't focus on the solution, but focus on the person, focus on the problem. One example is that I was part of a company that was accepted to H10AI. And the goal was to incorporate some sort of artificial intelligence software, whether it was a computer vision algorithm or a recommendation system, to help improve sports, improve aerobics, or people that watch YouTube. Well, it turned out that we were gung-ho about artificial intelligence incorporating into this, but we realized after we did product research that the customers actually didn't want any of that. They just wanted exactly like YouTube. They wanted more variety and quality content. That's their number one issues. And so we realized that artificial intelligence wasn't the solution at that time. And so that's just an example to highlight that. Make sure that you think about the problem first before you start thinking about how to use AI for it, because you might be surprised that it might not require AI at that point, or machine learning, or data analytics, or whatever it may be. It might just be something really simple. All right, so the second thing is that as soon as you have these user stories, before you even start thinking about machine learning or AI, you need to rank these user stories. So how do we rank them? So there's 3 steps to this. One is to rate the level of impact from 1 to 10. The second one is to estimate the effort level that it takes in order to achieve this user story. And the third one is to actually plot it in an impact versus effort 4-box graph. So let's go into details. So the first step is measuring the impact level. So 1 is the highest, 10 is the lowest. 1 is the most value provided to your business, whereas 10 is the opposite. You can think of it as like, this is fun to have. It's cool to have this, but it's not going to yield me the best return or the most value. You can think of it from a perspective of user story, or in the sense of, did the user say this story because they thought it was cool to have, or did they tell you, I need this, I need X, I need Y, whatever it may be. And so you rate this given your most current knowledge. So that's always like the one question that people ask me is, what if this changes? What if the impact based on our knowledge increases and we realize that, the impact is actually more important? Well, the answer is just change it. And you can still be able to see the graph and change it when you need to. This is a dynamic plot. It's not a static plot where you need to live by. So the second step is estimating your effort level. So 1 is the least amount of effort, 10 is the most amount of effort. 1 is a tool that takes the least amount of time to complete, whereas 10 is the opposite. You can think of it kind of anything between 2 to 3 years to complete, or if you're as startups, if you're on a very short horizon, that might be even 6 months or even 3 months, right? You base that depending on the type of company and type of interest from your stakeholders. And once again, you rate given your most current knowledge. You can always review this again at a later date. So what does that look like? And so the third part is the plot in a 4-box matrix. So essentially, based on your values, you'll be able to plot where these points are in this graph. And so there are 4 boxes that indicate to you the level of return on investment. And these are obviously dependent on the values that you've previously provided in steps 1 and 2 of impact and effort. And so the green box, the do now, is the stuff that you want to make sure that you do now because it has a high level of impact with the least amount of effort, which is like the ideal. The next section is the do next, where it's still high impact, but it takes at least a little bit more amount of time. The next thing is the do later, which is an okay amount of impact or to none impact, but the least amount of effort. And the thing you want to never do is to have something that has no impact and just sucks up your time. That's stuff you want to stay away from completely. So let's see an example of this. So here's some 3 examples that I have. Essentially, these are the user stories that we created previously with one more. What I did is we go through and measure the impact. So the first one, as a customer, I want to invite my friends so we can enjoy the service together. Well, the impact is really important because we want our customers to continue to use the app. That's a potential thought, right? We might want the people to use this in order for them to be engaged, or in order for us to have virality and to get more customers, we need people on it. So this is a huge impact to us, right? That's just one example. And so the next thing is to also look into the effort. Well, in the first example, adding an invite button, that seems relatively easy, well known for the software development. It's super common around these days. So the impact effort is pretty minuscule, I think. And so when you're evaluating these, if whether you're a technical developer or whether you're actually a business analyst, you may base your effort differently. And so the best way that I've seen it is for people to come together and to rate these together in a mutual democratic system, whether you have like a voting scheme or whether it's just 2 people saying, let's make it even. Like, I think it's a 5, you think it's a 4. All right, let's do 4.5. Or, you think it's 3 to 5, let's do it 4. I found that to be very helpful. So once you do that, once you rate them, you then apply them. And it seems like that number one is the first thing that we want to do. The number two is the second thing, and then number three is the next thing. And this is a pretty trivial example. So I wanted to go into an actual example that I have done previously. And so this example is actually in vertical farming. And so in vertical farming, you have many different types of users. And honestly, we did this in an Excel spreadsheet, and this was very, very helpful. We had a template that has ASA, and then we provided the types of users that we knew were part of the vertical farm. And then we just filled in the blanks of the goals and the reasons with the types. And at this point, what happened is that we talked to operators, growers, individually, and we were able to then create the goals and reasons from the customer needs. And so this is an example of some that we have. I won't go into detail, but essentially we did an impact and effort. And these are the actual values that we have provided. And you can see for the first two that as a grower or as an operator, I want a notification triggered nutrient delivery. So when it's out of range. The next one is a grower, I want to accurately track a grow environment. And then it has the associated reasons as well too. So you can see that maybe some of these aren't actually artificial intelligence or machine learning, but there are some that definitely can be machine learning or artificial intelligence or computer vision. And so let's go a little bit into the next step as we provided, which is the 4-box plot. You can see that out of all of our user stories that we've created, there are 13 that we identified as due now, 16 that we identified as due later, as due next, 12 as due later, and 8 as due never. So there can be times when you realize that your user stories or the solutions or the impact and effort is just not worth it at this point to focus. And it helps you to realize that you can do the things now that you'll do the best return on investment. And so to summarize from the user stories, what you want to do is 3 steps. You want to rate the level of impact from 1 to 10. You want to estimate the effort level from 1 to 10. And the third thing is you want to plot using an impact versus effort 4-box graph. So if the user story that has a potential solution using AI is in the do now section or do next, this will inherently yield a high return on investment. Okay. Now I'm not going to give you an analytical view of what kind of how to actually calculate the return on investment, but I wanted to give you a rule of thumb of if you're in the do now section, chances are that's going to yield a high amount of return on investment. You can say anything. I'm not going to give you a number, but just think of something as like extremely high. If you have four options of 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 4 is the highest, I think do now is 4. And then it subsequently goes lower as you go from do next to do later to do never. Okay. And so the third thing is that you want to assess if any of the user stories that you've identified in the do now section will actually be needed to be a machine learning algorithm. And so to do that, you use a machine learning canvas. And this helps you to plan out all of the content that you need in order to develop the machine learning algorithm. So that way you come prepared and realize the vision. And so here's an example of machine learning canvas. You have 4 sections. You have the goal. You have the learning phase that's kind of on the right that has 4 boxes. You have the prediction phase that's on the left side, and then you have the evaluation. And so each of those 4 areas dictates information that you should write down, so that way you can collect your thoughts on machine learning algorithms. And so that would include what the actual goal is, the data sources, how to collect the data, what kind of models you need, when you're predicting, what kind of metrics you're looking for, and then when you're evaluating in a live environment, production environment, what statistics or metrics you need in order to evaluate the efficacy of your models. So the machine learning canvas is a great way to understand and organize your machine learning solution. And so from each user story in the do now section, you want to do 2 things. You want to first determine if the solution needs machine learning, and if so, then create a machine learning canvas. And so when you do the canvas, you want to do 4 things in the following order. You want to first identify the goal. You want to then go into the learning section and fill in those boxes, and then go into the prediction section, fill in those boxes, and then finally go into the evaluation section to fill in those boxes. And that actually leaves that's a really good flow, because there might be some things that you've thought of in one section that can then be applied to the next sections and further increase your level of creative thinking. So let me give you two examples. The first one is, as a manager, I want to accurately track grow environment so that I know how the system design is performing. And the second one is, as an operator, I want to officially count germination successes so that we can reduce the man hours. So like I said, from each user story in the Do Now section, you want to determine if the solution needs machine learning, and if so, create a machine learning canvas. So let's go with the first one. So in this one, you're wanting to accurately track. And so tracking can be typically associated with sensors. When you want to track CO2 or light or humidity, those kinds of things. And so based on this current user story, we can easily identify that this phase does not need machine learning, because all the user wants is just to track the information. They don't need analytics at this point. They just want tracking. They just want to see a graph with no smart technology, so to say, at that point. Okay, so it doesn't need machine learning. So let's go on the second one. So the second one, they want to count. They want to count how many germination successes. And for those who aren't familiar with germination, basically that means that they want to count how many plants go from seed to like a little plant. And they want to be able to do that automatically. And so for those who are in the computer vision section of artificial intelligence or machine learning, you'll realize that it's a simple object detection, object recognition software by using a camera. And so this is a machine learning problem. And so we need to move to the machine learning canvas. So let me explain a little bit once again of what the details are in the machine learning canvas, so you can have a better idea of how to apply and use it. So the first one is the goal. And so this is the value proposition. This is, you want to write the who, the what, and the why. You want to know, what are we trying to do for the end users of the predictive system, and what objectives are we serving? And so it just turns out that the goal is actually the user story. So this one is really easy to think. You literally just put in your user story and this section's done. The second is then going to the learn section. And so you have 4 of those, which are data sources, collecting data, features, and building models. And so you start with the data sources. So where are you going to get your data? Are they going to be raw data sources, commercial use data, internal, external databases? Are you going to get it from API, web scrape, getting from static files that you currently have? Do you need to annotate? You need to use tools such as mTurk or Mechanical Turk, if you're not familiar with that, or Crowdflower to get the outputs of data. What do you need in order to get all the data in order to learn? That's really the question. And so you write that down, so that way you can have a good thought process of understanding how long it's going to take you. And you know what? At this point, you might even think that the impact or the effort might be much higher, and that could affect what's in the 4-box plot. And so that you're more than welcome to then change it. And if you realize that it's not supposed to be in the Do Now section, then by all means keep iterating. That's a good point of using this system. Or if you realize that this is actually something that can be really easy to do, might be bumped up on your priority list. And so the next section is collecting data. So how do you get the new data? How do you to learn from? What would be the inputs and the outputs? I took a course one time and that simplified machine learning algorithm, especially supervised ones, and they said that, and they really dumbed it down for people who initially had business backgrounds, and they said, in order to identify if machine learning is a really good problem, you first need to understand inputs and outputs. You need to understand what kind of input you're going to put into your model, and then what output do you want to achieve, and then you need to realistically associate and think, like, does that actually make sense, right? For example, the classic housing prices, right? I mean, if you get the square footage, if you get the number of bathrooms, those definitely affect the housing price, right? But if you were to say, what kind of fridge is in there, that could affect it. But if you're basing solely on that particular statistic, chances are that's not going to really affect it. Like, you can kind of think about it through logically in order to get at least some sort of intuition. Anyways, so with collecting data, you want to identify the inputs, you want to identify the outputs, you want to think about how to continuously collect this data as well too. Do you have an internal system such as vertical farming where you can collect images, right? If not, how are you going to get those, continually to get those? You want to You want to make sure that you're getting more data so that way you can further improve your models. You don't want to just have one set of data only. That's it. The second thing is to identify the types of features. Just as I told you about the housing market prices, features would be anything from any important to the data, right? Such as square footage, number of bathrooms, number of rooms, if it's a basement, what type of house is it? And so these are distinctive attributes or aspects from the data. And so these features are the variables that a data engineer may extract from the data sources that would be listed. And so the next part is, once you have identified what the features are, so then start thinking about building the model. So when do we update the models with new training data? How long do we have to featureize the training inputs and create a model? Why is this necessary? Would having more data lead to better models? Would the dynamics of whatever phenomena or behavior captured from the data might change? Is that something that's very important for you to realize? Is that the reason why you need to update the model? And so thinking about these would really help you to understand the process that you would need in order to update the models. So then once you have those, then you then move to the next section, which is the prediction section. And so you first start out with the machine learning task. So what is the input and what is the outputs that you're trying to do? So what are the outputs you're trying to predict? What are the inputs you want to use in order to get those? And so think of this section as a question. Is this email important? How much is the property worth? Giving the property information. So I guess you can kind of say that if you're able to provide a question and identify what the subject is, that can help you to identify what inputs and outputs are. And so in this ML task, you also want to identify what type of problem is, because once again, different problems can have different solutions, or they have different ways of approaching solutions, which basically helps you to develop models better, or to be quick about finding better solutions and faster solutions. The next section is this decision. So how are your predictions used to make decisions that provide the proposed value to the end user? So you can think of, as we talked about the questions the last time, which were subjects. That same question that you use can also be applied to decisions, except instead of finding the subject, you're actually trying to answer the question. So is the email important, which is the subject of which was the machine learning task, is identifying the emails. Then in the decision, you're answering that question. So you need a yes or a no, which is a binary prediction. And so this helps you once again to break down. I know most people who are very familiar with artificial intelligence may not necessarily need this canvas, but it's really good to help, especially if you're trying to communicate with business analysts, or somebody who is not technical in artificial intelligence. Providing a machine learning canvas would really help you to, in my opinion, sell them. And so how much is the property worth? This is another example. We're talking about the property. That's a subject that you want to identify. And the metric or the decision that you want to do is you want to get a dollar value in Canadian in order to understand what the property is worth. So the third thing is making predictions. So when do we make predictions on the new inputs? How long do we have to featureize a new input and make a prediction? And so the frequency and quantity of predictions is what you need to assess. So as well as the total time acceptable by the domain of application to make a prediction. So think of it this way: if you're actually going to predict, can you take 5 minutes to sift through a huge algorithm in order for you to make the decision, or are you on an edge device and you need a real-time solution? Those are kind of questions that you need to ask yourself, because then it'll help you identify and productionize your algorithms to a way that meets all the criteria that you need for your company. The fourth thing is the offline evaluation. So these are methods and metrics to evaluate your system before you actually deploy. So think of them as test cases. So you want to create test cases so that way you can see how your model reacts to the data. It helps you to establish the trust, and you want to choose your tests and test data that makes it easy to present meaningful results and to interpret them in the domain where the system will be used. I know, artificial intelligence and machine learning, there's a lot of things we can't understand. But with that being said, I think we should learn how to do our best to understand as much as we can with as many tests as we can think about. We might not still fully understand it. We might not consider all the edge cases, but if we can create as many tests with test data, then in the end, we'll be able to do this. We'll be able to improve. So the next section is evaluation. And so evaluation is basically the methods and metrics to evaluate the system after you deploy. So the difference between this one versus the other one is that this one includes other metrics that are not necessarily machine learning. So it could be, everything from offline, which would be anything from like sensitivity, specificity, accuracy, all those kinds of things. But it could also be things like quantifying ROI, like, how many users are actually using your machine learning algorithm, right? It could be those kinds of external types of metrics. So it could be like false positives, tests on data, not within the training data, time saved like consumer search, etc. So this is a little bit long-winded, but I hope we can get a good summary of what a machine learning canvas is. And so it's a great way to understand and organize the machine learning solution. And so from each user story in the Do Now section, you want to determine if the solution needs machine learning. And if so, you need to create the machine learning canvas. And so you fill in the respective information in the following order. You start with the goal, then in the learn section, then the predict section, and then the evaluation section. And so if you can successfully fill out all of the blanks in the machine learning canvas, then the machine learning solution will turn a high return on investment. You'll know what you need to do in order to achieve that ROI. And so in conclusion, to assess machine learning in order to increase your ROI, you need 3 steps. The first one is to assess the current needs of your business by creating user stories from your customers. The second one is to rank the user stories by estimating the desired need and time to complete. The third one is to create a machine learning canvas for each user story with the greatest impact and least time to completion. So I hope you've all enjoyed this.
What's a good way to get into machine learning as a data analyst?
That's a good question. So I think the advice for somebody who wants to get into data analyst is the same advice for somebody who wants to be a computer software developer with no experience. I had a friend who basically was able to do this. He had a business degree, and he was able to land a job. Mind you, it took him maybe about 6 months. He was fortunate enough to have a child, and he was able to do paternity leave before, and he was able to practice a lot during that time. And so honestly, I think the best way of doing it is to exercise your knowledge. So a good way of doing it is to get relevant projects. I always tell people when they ask me this to go on LinkedIn, check out these jobs that are there, check out jobs that you're actually interested in, look at all of those requirements, and then see where your knowledge gap is. If you find that you're really interested in computer vision but don't have any computer vision projects under your belt, go and get some, right? Figure out what you're really interested in and then start working on a project. There's so much information these days. My father-in-law, who's a construction person, every time we talk to him about doing construction, or I ask him like, how do I do this? The first thing he always says is just go on YouTube. Like, I'm terrible at explaining this. Like, go on YouTube, right? And I think that's the same thing with machine learning or artificial intelligence or anything like that. There's so much content on there. It's not, and most of it isn't by a paid wall, right? And so I would highly suggest start on YouTube, start on doing Coursera, all those kinds of free, MOOCs that are there. You can definitely be able to get those resources to leverage it. And if you feel like that's still not enough, I mean, there's paid ones if you want to do it too. There's people who are willing to give you free advice if you just contact them on LinkedIn. And so, I mean, I would also suggest that, right? You don't necessarily need to pay somebody to help you learn more. You can ask and find a mentor. It just takes a little bit more proactiveness. But yeah, so that's the advice that I would say.
Yeah, no, definitely, and that's certainly some good advice. I presented at a QCI, which is the Canadian undergraduate conference in artificial intelligence. There's like a bunch of Canadian universities, and a lot of people, like grads, were kind of asking, "Man, it's so hard for me to get into this space. What do you suggest?" And just to kind of piggyback off what you said there, I would definitely recommend, if you're an ML guy or a data analyst or you're a data scientist or a software developer, reach out to a few people and say, hey, look, want to solve a problem, want to build a little product. I was working with a guy a little while ago, and it was like, oh, what have you been doing for the last few months? He's like, man, I just built a copy of Slack, and it's an open source version, and it got like 10,000 downloads. People love it. So even if you're kind of doing stuff just as a side hustle or a side project, it's invaluable when it comes to getting in the door, because you might have everybody 100 people did this Coursera course, and then there's one person who did that but also went further and teamed up with a data engineer and a back-end engineer, and they put together this little MVP product, but they were using what they've learned and putting it into production and into practice, because that's what I see is the biggest. It's like, oh, you've got the knowledge, you haven't done it in the big bad world. So getting that commercial experience is super challenging.
And another thing, just to add on that as well too, I think there's two things. One is relevant knowledge, relevant projects. If you can, and that's why I say go on LinkedIn, find the things that you like, find your knowledge gaps, and then work on getting those requirements done for those specific jobs that you're actually interested. So find the niches. And then another thing too is that sometimes I put on my resume, back in the day, I would put something like playing board games or watching anime or something like that. And I can't tell you how many times questioners or interviewers are like, hey, so what kind of anime do you watch, right? Or where do you like to go hiking? Like, okay, I'll talk about that, right? No problem. And so developing those relationships as well during interviews is a huge asset, right? And so it's very helpful.
Yeah, totally. We're all people at the end of the day, and I prep my candidates. I'm like, look, don't interview, have a conversation with that person. Yeah. Ask questions. What problems are you working on? What is the current team working on? That's all really valuable, like you said, to kind of build that rapport and relationship. Ask quickly how to build trust as an independent AI pro. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, for sure. It almost is like the same question as previously. It's a little bit different. I get that. But people get really interested if you have relevant projects to what they're doing. So for example, I'll tell you this. So before I even did consulting, I just finished my master's thesis, and it was in sports analytics for hockey, using computer vision. And I kid you not, 6 months later, somebody contacted me and they're like, hey, I saw you on this obscure conference, or I saw a paper from there. It was my first paper, actually. So it wasn't that good, but they're like, hey, I saw that paper. Can we have a conversation? Can we talk about it? Right. And because of that, we're able to actually have an establishment of work. And it turned out that he was actually doing the same thing, or he wanted to do the same thing, but for lacrosse. Right. And so there's a lot of relevancy that came from it. And so I think building trust as an independent AI pro, one of the factors is to make sure that you do have projects that are relevant and makes people interested in. I think another way to develop trust as well too is to just ask them to do a small project. I like YouTube a lot, and so there's this one guy on YouTube. I saw it on my feed, and maybe you guys have seen it too, where the title was, I asked to do somebody's lawn for free and got paid after, or something like that, right? And so that's something that's important as well too, is that developing trust is. And maybe sometimes it might just be asking somebody to, or telling people that you would love to give them an estimate, or you'd love to help them, work with them on a small scale to see if this works. People love developing trust, and trust is something that sometimes is only developed in small quantities. And so providing small opportunities for people to trust you, whether it's asking to do a project or even maybe having multiple conversations with them, not just trying to sell your business or sell yourself, but to literally just try to sell friendship, or mentorship, or whatever it is, really goes a long way, and it helps people to establish that trust.